So remember when I made that joke about Insane in the Arcane?
Ah yes, my summoning circle has finally been completed. With the power of these instruments, I'll be able to summon Michael Brecker's ghost from the grave and steal all of his crazy licks. Now quiet, as I channel the powers of the Insane in the Arcane.
Yeah, so maybe that was actually some kind of premonition of the future. Well, this happened a lot sooner than I expected, but I got to be the lead composer on an indie game. I've had the pleasure of writing some music for Tyrion Cuthbert, Attorney of the Arcane, developed by Diamondhenge Entertainment. It's a visual novel game inspired by the Ace Attorney series, but also includes some elements of fantasy and magic. We've just launched a crowdfunding campaign for the game over on Indiegogo, so it's not totally complete yet. But the game's demo, which includes the full first chapter, is available for free now on Steam. Plus, you can hear some of my music in the demo. I've personally been really excited to be able to work as a composer for a game in some capacity, and I'm sure some of you are excited to hear that news as well. So today I'd like to share some of the music I've written for the game so far, and give some backstory as to how I went about composing the music. We're gonna steer clear from the deep, esoteric music theory concepts. Even though some of you might like that, we're not gonna do that today. As part of the game's crowdfunding launch, we've also released the Tyrion Cuthbert, Attorney of the Arcane original soundtrack preview, which includes 5 tracks used in the game's demo. It's available for streaming on my Spotify page and also available for free on Bandcamp. 3 of the tracks are composed by me, and the other 2 are composed by none other than fellow video game music YouTuber Shady Cicada. He's been handling some of the more high-energy themes for the game, like some of the trailer music, the objection and pursuit style themes, and they're all bangers. I've mostly been handling area themes and character themes, so I'll be sharing those with you today. Now, before I started writing music for the game, I had to take care of spotting the game, which is when you make decisions on things like the style of the music and how the music will function in the game. For Attorney of the Arcane, the function was actually pretty easy to determine, since there's some precedent established by other visual novel games like Ace Attorney and the Danganronpa series. They typically have looping pieces of background music associated with different characters, places, and scenarios. In this case, I had to handle music for the courtroom lobby, the courtroom trial theme, and music for the character Celeste McCoy, all of which present their own unique challenges and requirements in the music. Determining the style for the music, though, turned out to be a bit more challenging than just figuring out where the music would be needed. Since the game draws so much inspiration from the style of Ace Attorney, it was tempting to write music in the exact same style as Ace Attorney and just copy the game's tropes and sounds. I think this could have worked okay, but I also knew that I didn't want the music to just sound like, Ace Attorney music but written in 2021. Right? I think there's more potential there. So I decided to take the advice from people by writing what you know and threw in a little bit of jazz in the mix. Now, when a lot of people think of jazz in a video game, they think of Persona vibes. Sorry, I had to do that. Now, when a lot of people think of jazz in a video game, they think of full big band swing type of stuff, like Jump Up Superstar in a Mario game, or some of the more recent Mario game soundtracks. Or maybe it's some sort of MIDI synthesized big band with a drum part that's just not really swinging. So part of my mission as a composer is to show that there's a lot more to jazz than just how it's commonly heard or used. I think it's an extremely wide and nuanced genre with lots of potential to fit into different situations, even if the story or scenario doesn't necessarily have ties to tropes that are idiomatic to jazz, like a noir game or downtown New York in the 40s. Jazz exists apart from those settings, and that's part of my mission, is to show people that it can work in so many situations. So the music you'll hear from me in this game has a lot of jazz influences, but also incorporates some elements of orchestral stuff that's more typical of the fantasy genre. It's a tough but fun balance to strike. I think this balance is most obvious in my courtroom trial music, so let's start there. This music plays underneath the opening proceedings of a trial where the judge, prosecutor, and defense attorney go over the details of the case. When Steven, the head developer, asked me to write this piece, the word he used was bureaucratic, which I thought was a really great target to aim for. I was imagining the feeling and rhythm of a bunch of white-collar workers sitting in some government office somewhere, just trudging through their workday, shuffling papers, stamping documents, and like rummaging through file cabinets. And also like the sound of whenever I go to the DOL to like get some new tabs for the car or something, there's always some lady at the window who's like, next, to call up the next person. And I just wanted to channel all those bureaucratic vibes by making this track sound very matter of fact. So to give the feeling of just trudging along through a day's work, I settled on like a triplet march kind of thing, which is inspired by a piano piece from The Firm, which is a movie that my dad used to watch all the time, and for some reason the titling music stuck with me. I added some occasional metallic percussion sounds from the triangle and tambourine in the background, which kind of mimic the sound of typewriters and clicky ballpoint pens that you might see in an office, and there are also sparkly sounds that you'd hear from the percussion section in an orchestra. Some irregular timpani hits and strong accents in the piano mimic the feeling of a stamp hitting a desk, or maybe the gavel hitting the judge's desk. What's the thing that the gavel hits? I don't actually know what that's called. Twitch chat is telling me that the gavel hits the sound block. That's, I didn't expect it to have such a very simple name, but I guess that's, courtroom logic for you. The harmony of this piece is based around suspended chords that move in a cyclical motion. This helps give the piece a constant sense of motion without it being too jarring for the listener. Lastly, I threw in a light, non-obtrusive melody on top of all that using a muted trumpet and a flute to give the piece a bit more air. And that's pretty much it. I'm really pleased with how this piece came out, and even though it's pretty short and sparse, I think it does its job in the game pretty nicely. My favorite thing about video game music is how the music blends with the scenario and all the elements in the game to create an experience that really comes to life for the player. And I hope this piece of music makes it just that much more real for you. One thing I've been trying to do with my music lately is use as many live instruments as possible. I think live instruments played by human musicians have a certain quality that just makes the performance better. So whenever realistic and budget permitting, I recorded live instruments for this score, which makes the process more complex for sure, but it's also really rewarding. So hey, you should totally go over and consider supporting the Indiegogo campaign for this game, so maybe I can get enough of a budget to hire some more musicians to play on this project. Doesn't that sound great? Sounds great to me, so you should support it. Thank you. Now let's back up a little bit and talk about the courtroom lobby piece. This plays inside the courthouse before a trial begins. Here, you're typically just chatting with your party members and colleagues about the trial at hand, or just things that are generally going on. The mood here is relaxed and mysterious. The trial hasn't started yet, but there's a small underlying feeling of anticipation for what's to come in the court proceedings. I leaned into a straight eighths, sort of bossa jazz groove to capture some of the relaxed feelings, but also chose to fragment the melody between groups of instruments to keep things sounding a little bit disjointed and mysterious. The underlying harmony here is also primarily based around suspended chords, just like the courtroom trial theme, and this helps keep the music from feeling too stagnant or making too much of a statement, because this is certainly underscored to all the dialogue that happens on top of it. I used trumpet and tenor saxophone for the main melody here to reference an iconic duo of horns that typically play the melody in a lot of jazz recordings. I thought that the constant rhythm of the cross stick and the triangle used throughout the track kind of reminded me of like a ticking clock, like you're just kind of sitting on a bench in the lobby and you're counting the minutes until the trial starts, and you hear like a tick-tock, and not like the app tick-tock, but you hear like a what your grandparents meant when they said tick-tock, the ticking tock of a clock in the background. There's also some tubular bells, some people call them chimes, in this track, and they sound like tones you might hear from a big grandfather clock that convey a slight sense of time and also ominous feelings. You wouldn't think there'd be so much to talk about in this just 50-second long loop. The last track for today's soundtrack preview is Celeste's theme, which is quite a bit different than the previous two songs I've shared. Since this is a character theme, it has to carry a lot more emotional weight. This piece of music exists to represent and define this character, which gives this piece a lot of potential and a lot of power, honestly. So, to fully understand this theme, you've got to talk about the character Celeste. In this game, the ability to use magic is held by the nobility almost exclusively. Celeste McCoy was an illegitimate child born from an affair between a noble and a commoner. She was abandoned at an inn in a small village and was later adopted by the local innkeeper. Her adoptive father, the innkeeper, hates the nobility and also hates magic. So, since Celeste was born from noble blood, she has the ability to perform magic, but has to hide that from her father. One day, Celeste's father found out her secret and disowned her in a fit of rage. I won't go much further into the story as to not spoil the plot of the demo, but as a result of the ensuing events, Celeste suffers a feeling of self-loathing because of her bloodline and has a lot of trouble accepting herself. So that's a lot to work with as far as writing a musical theme goes. I found the important ideas to convey were noble ancestry, a sense of fragility since she was abandoned as a child, and also hopefulness. While Celeste suffers from self-loathing, she ultimately wants to be able to move forward with her life and accept herself for who she is, which requires hope and faith in the future. So when writing Celeste's theme, I had the challenge of summarizing this whole story in a 90-second piece of music. Challenging to pull off, but also really fun at the same time. Since she comes from noble ancestry, I leaned into a more traditional orchestral style for this track, while also using some elements of jazz harmony. Celeste's fragility and story of abandonment is represented by a solo piano at the start of her theme. The melody I wrote here is pretty simple, but I'm really proud of it. I think it turned out super well. Writing a good melody is so hard when composing, and writing a melody you can look back on after you're done with it and still be happy is something to be proud of for sure. After the solo piano statement, the melody is taken up by a flute, which is a bit fuller sounding than just the solo piano, but still relatively fragile, which represents Celeste's continuing development as she was raised by the innkeeper. The orchestration here gets a little bit fuller, but is still restrained, just like Celeste is with her magical abilities. After the second statement of the melody, we get to the B section with a melody played by the flugelhorn. I just love the flugelhorn. It's got some fanfare-ish elements, kind of like the trumpet and other brass instruments, but it's also dark and subtle enough to where it can better blend with other orchestral instruments. It just sounds like the sunset to me. Is that weird? I don't think so. Anyway, the flugelhorn melody is my interpretation of Celeste's true desire within her heart to be able to express herself for who she really is. It's like a fanfare coming from deep within her heart, but she's not ready to be able to like shout that out or just broadcast it, which is why I went for the darker sound of the flugelhorn over something more fanfare-ish like a trumpet. There were also a few interjections by the flute in this section, which I interpreted as interjections by Celeste's present self saying, "No, I'm not ready to reveal this," or "I can't let this out yet." As the song wraps up, the flugelhorn plays a sorrowful descending melody line, as Celeste's inner desires are once again stifled by her current situation, leaving us with a solo flute playing a slight variation on the game's main motif to conclude the loop. That was a lot of detail for this one tune, but man, I love it. Game music is so cool because it has the power to tell stories like this. And when you pair it with other media like the character art and the story and the scenario, it just feels so good. I really recommend playing the demo so you can experience Celeste's whole story for yourself. So I've had a lot to say throughout this whole analysis, and I'd just like to say thank you to those of you who stuck around through it and listened. I love video game music so much, and I take the opportunity to compose video game music of my own very seriously, so thanks for listening to my analysis. I highly recommend you check out Eternity of the Arcane's demo. It's the full first chapter, has about an hour's worth of content, maybe a little bit more if you play the game at a slower pace. If you'd like to help support the game's development and make sure it gets finished, or you want to support me and my opportunities as the composer, thank you. I'd highly recommend contributing to the Indiegogo campaign. We sincerely appreciate any of your contributions, and we'll use the funds to make a really great game. So, thanks for watching, hope you support the project, and I will see you in the next video.